Hollywood is no stranger to scandal, but the story surrounding Michelle Phillips still left the entire entertainment world stunned. Some secrets are buried so deeply that it feels as if time itself has erased them, until the truth is accidentally uncovered. And it was Michelle who pulled back the curtain, exposing one of the most shocking mysteries in rock history: the true identity of Mama Cass's daughter's biological father. It was a secret Cass Elliot carried to her grave. When Michelle finally learned the truth years later, she described the moment as feeling like a bomb detonating straight through her heart. But Michelle's story doesn't end with that revelation. Her life has been a turbulent spiral of intense emotion, addiction, love, and dangerously destructive relationships. If you want to uncover the full, jaw-dropping truth behind the image, don't look away from this video. As a member of the iconic 1960s folk group the Mamas and the Papas, Michelle Phillips was no stranger to conflict or spectacular downfalls that shook rock history itself. And despite her angelic face, she was often right at the center of the storm. Michelle Phillips never lived an ordinary life, and it all began when she was just a child. Her mother died suddenly from a brain aneurysm, leaving Michelle and her sister untethered and emotionally adrift. Their father, Gil, a fiercely bohemian spirit, chose to raise his daughters by his own rules, far from anything conventional. In Michelle's memories, he taught her discipline and kindness, but he was also a man who brought a constant stream of women into their home, one after another, with unsettling regularity. Night after night, behind a perpetually closed bedroom door, young Michelle listened to sounds she was far too young to understand. Moments that quietly twisted her innocence and planted deep confusion. From those nights, she absorbed a lesson that would shape her entire life. The adult world was unpredictable and dangerous, and survival demanded strength. Then, at just 13, Michelle encountered someone who would change her path forever. Her name was Tamar Hoddle, a strange, magnetic Hollywood girl a few years older, and the daughter of Dr. George Hoddle, the man long rumored to be connected to the infamous Black Dahlia murder. Tamar entered Michelle's life like a sudden storm, pulling her toward a darker, more dangerous orbit. Rebellious, dangerous, yet impossible to resist, that was Tamar. She introduced Michelle to live music, handed her the first pills she ever tried, and even helped an 8th grader obtain a fake ID. To Michelle, Tamar wasn't a threat. She was freedom made flesh. Together, they drifted through the streets of Hollywood, soaking in the rising sounds of the 1960s, believing music might wash away the loneliness buried deep inside them both. In 1961, not yet 17, Michelle ran away to San Francisco with Tamar in search of a new life. There, fate placed her in the path of John Phillips, the charismatic leader of the acclaimed folk group The Journeymen. John was 25, married to high society dancer Susan Adams, and the father of 2 young children. But for Michelle, it was love at first sight. Raised in a bohemian household that never taught her the meaning of boundaries, she loved with reckless intensity, as if diving headfirst into an abyss. Michelle refused to exist as anyone's secret. One afternoon, she stood on Susan's doorstep and said, without hesitation, "I'm in love with your husband." Michelle was not John's first affair. Susan, long desensitized to betrayal, calmly invited the fragile young girl inside and told her that her husband had lovers everywhere, and that Michelle was simply the latest one. Yet despite John Phillips's reputation as a notorious womanizer, this time he fell for Michelle just as fiercely as she fell for him. He later wrote, "It was as if she stepped out of a dream and straight into my life." By 1962, John and Susan had divorced, and soon after, John and Michelle moved to New York and married. John Phillips was widely praised as a musical genius, a man with an almost uncanny instinct for spotting and even shaping emerging trends. But alongside that brilliance came volatility and an extreme need for control. To many in the industry, John resembled a charming snake oil salesman, always persuasive, always manipulating people to get what he wanted. In the early years of his career, he experimented with everything from sweet doo-wop to sentimental ballads, searching for the formula that would unlock mainstream success. Yet no matter how much he experimented, John remained obsessed with maintaining absolute control, especially over Michelle, his young wife, who was as angelic as she was dazzling, and whom he regarded as the greatest pride of his life. Michelle had a future of her own, and it was already taking shape. She had just signed a teenage modeling contract, standing on the edge of a glamorous fashion career. But John shut it down without hesitation. He demanded she abandon everything, pulling her fully into his world, putting her through vocal training, insisting she join his band, and keeping her constantly at his side, never more than a step away. Even before the group officially existed, John insisted on controlling every detail: how the music would sound, how the image would be crafted, and even how Michelle lived her private life. On tour, he required her to stay in closely supervised dorms, ensuring she was never out of his sight. And yet, despite the suffocating control, John's musical gift was undeniable. He could draw inspiration from anywhere, even during late-night wanderings through the city, fueled by stimulants and restless energy. One such night, drifting beneath foggy streets and flickering streetlights, the first fragments of California Dreamin' began to take shape in his mind. By morning, John was shaking Michelle awake, urging her to help him finish the lyrics. The song would soon become one of the defining anthems of the 1960s, and not long after, a legend was born. Around that same time, John crossed paths with Denny Doherty, a tenor with a fragile, wandering troubadour aura. Then came Cass Elliot, whose voice was unlike anything anyone had heard before. Together, the four formed the Mamas and the Papas. But even before the band officially came together, the cracks were already there. And it was no surprise that John's obsession with controlling Michelle only tightened its grip within their marriage. What John never anticipated was Michelle's response. Instead of yielding, she began to push back. As their marriage turned into a tense battle for control, Michelle stumbled upon what she believed might be a way out: Russ Titleman, her sister's new boyfriend. Their early conversations were innocent enough, but brief meetings quickly ignited into something dangerous and forbidden. Despite the fact that both were already involved with other people, the connection deepened at alarming speed. They slipped into a secret affair, hidden from everyone else. For the first time in her life, Michelle was no longer the one being monitored or restrained. She was the one crossing the line, the one breaking the rules inside a marriage that had once seemed untouchable. For John, this reversal was unbearable. Being betrayed wounded him far more deeply than any affair of his own ever could. Blinded by rage, John called Russ directly, his voice ice-cold as he delivered the warning, "You know, another man might be waiting outside your door with a shotgun." The threat may have sounded extreme, but no one doubted he meant it. And in a bitter twist of fate, the man who had cheated countless times now found himself on the other side of betrayal. Terrified, Russ ended the relationship abruptly. Yet what unsettled John even more was Michelle's reaction. There was no guilt, no apology, not even regret. She had grown up in a household where infidelity was commonplace. Her father's many affairs had taught her early on that sex carried no shame, and loyalty was never as simple as people pretended it was. Consumed by rage, John funneled his pain straight into his songwriting, turning it into "Go Where You Want to Go," a sharp, sarcastic message aimed squarely at Michelle. But by then, the damage had spread far beyond a failing marriage. The entire band was beginning to fracture. In 1965, the Mamas and the Papas were standing at the very height of their fame. California Dreamin' was sweeping across America. They were performing on The Ed Sullivan Show, partying through the night and tearing each other apart by day. It was as if every burst of creative brilliance demanded a payment in chaos. If Michelle's affair with Russ had only cracked the foundation of the Phillips household, what came next threatened to bring the whole structure down. That next chapter involved Denny Doherty, her bandmate, the soft-spoken tenor with a fragile, aching voice. After endless rehearsals thick with unspoken tension, the attraction between Michelle and Denny became impossible to ignore, and they crossed a line neither could undo. When John discovered the truth, his instinct was the same as always: turn heartbreak into music. He wrote "I Saw Her Again" in an attempt to stitch together what was left of his shattered heart. But this time, the wound refused to close. The tension inside the band escalated until John and Michelle finally decided to separate. John moved on quickly, attaching himself to a new woman, a polished high-society socialite, while Michelle, bruised and defiant, quietly began seeing Gene Clark, the gifted musician from the Byrds. It was meant to remain hidden, but Gene refused to stay in the shadows. One night, he appeared at a Mamas and the Papas concert wearing a blazing red shirt, seated front row as if daring anyone to challenge him. Michelle spotted him instantly, and a surge of confidence washed over her. She sang that night as though every lyric and every glance were meant solely for Jean, while John, standing silently in the wings, watched it all unfold. For Michelle, it felt like a victory. For John, already stretched to his limit by her repeated affairs, it was a final public humiliation he could no longer tolerate. After the show, he made a brutal decision and fired her from the band. When Michelle turned to the other members for support, they chose John's side without hesitation. In a single moment, she was expelled from the very group she had helped build. But Michelle, with her angelic face and volatile spirit, had no intention of disappearing quietly. Her anger only deepened when the band replaced her with Jill Gibson, the girlfriend of producer Lou Adler. That was when the message became clear: they were serious, and she was truly out. Furious, Michelle fought back the only way she knew how. She stormed into a Mamas and the Papas recording session, screaming that she would destroy them all. When Denny Doherty refused to stand up for her, she even lashed out at him. The band had always lived in chaos, and that day was no exception. Yet despite the explosion, they eventually allowed Michelle to return. For a brief moment after the reunion, it seemed as though the storm had finally passed. The Mamas and the Papas went on to create one of the most glittering chapters of the 1960s, performing at the Monterey Pop Festival alongside rising legends like Jimi Hendrix and turning San Francisco into an anthem for a generation hungry for freedom in the age of Aquarius. Success came in waves, and with their earnings, Michelle and John purchased a lavish mansion in Bel Air. It quickly became a notorious gathering place for rock stars and movie icons, hosting parties that stretched until sunrise. Amid the excess and glamour, Michelle discovered she was pregnant. Not long after, their daughter China Phillips was born, their only child, a fragile symbol of hope within an otherwise turbulent life. But behind the mansion's golden doors and the applause of the outside world, a darker reality lingered. John didn't loosen his grip on Michelle, he tightened it. Cass Elliott's sister later recalled her first visit to the Bel Air house, admitting, "I didn't feel comfortable at all in that place." The atmosphere inside the house was heavy, and so was the darkness that seemed to cling to John. Tamar Hoddle later recalled that during one visit, John wouldn't even allow her to leave the room, as if Michelle were being kept under some kind of house arrest. Michelle has never fully spoken about everything that happened within those walls, before or after her daughter's birth, but what she has revealed is deeply unsettling. She once admitted that John assaulted her so violently she ended up in the hospital. That was the moment she knew she could no longer survive in that marriage. In 1968, while baby China was still an infant, Michelle made the most painful decision of her life and filed for divorce, cutting herself free from a union that had turned into a living nightmare. Without Michelle to anchor him, John unraveled at alarming speed. While the band was no stranger to drug-soaked excess, John was always the one who spiraled the furthest. He plunged deeper into substance abuse alongside his new girlfriend, actress Genevieve Waite. His behavior became so extreme that even Keith Richards of the Rolling Stones reportedly threw him out of a party, unable to tolerate the chaos he brought with him. Michelle, however, was facing her own reckoning. The same year she left John was also the year the Mamas and the Papas teetered on the edge of collapse. Cass Elliot was eager to pursue a solo career, and shifting musical trends were already leaving the group behind. Slowly, the band faded, until they were finally released from their recording contract in 1969. By then, John and Michelle were no longer a couple, and neither was the band they had built together. With her marriage in ruins and her music career shattered, Michelle chose to reinvent herself. She turned toward acting, drawn into the glittering world of cinema, where bright lights and famous faces offered the promise of a fresh start. In those early, uncertain days of auditions and screen tests, Michelle had a brief romance with a young, rising actor who was still on the brink of fame, Jack Nicholson. Jack's recklessness, fearless energy, and hint of madness seemed to reawaken instincts in Michelle that had long been buried beneath the suffocating shadow of John Phillips. As she tested herself in different acting roles, fate intervened. Michelle was cast as the female lead in the last movie, a daring, countercultural project directed by Dennis Hopper, fresh off the explosive success of Easy Rider, the film that had just upended Hollywood. When she signed on, Michelle knew exactly who Hopper was. His reputation glittered and terrified in equal measure. He was a true outlaw of the era, a legendary wild child whose temperament was as unpredictable as it was extreme. Yet instead of seeing danger, Michelle felt drawn in. Having already survived life alongside an unstable rock star, she found Hopper's chaos strangely familiar and dangerously intoxicating. To Michelle, Dennis Hopper wasn't a threat. He was an obsession, a storm she believed she could calm, a wild spirit she wanted to contain. When the production moved to Peru, the situation unraveled beyond anyone's control. The set became soaked in alcohol, drugs, and violent mood swings, with Hopper always at the center. Rather than stepping back, Michelle plunged deeper. She fell for him completely, later admitting that her attraction was driven by a Florence Nightingale instinct, the need to rescue a broken man. But in trying to save Hopper, Michelle came close to losing herself. When filming ended, the two rushed headlong into a reckless choice. Almost immediately, Michelle and Dennis Hopper got married. Their bohemian-style wedding in late 1970 was stark and surreal. Guests remembered paper bags holding candles as decorations, and Hopper reading the entire ceremony from the Gospel of Thomas, as though performing in some strange theatrical piece. Yet the true awakening didn't come during the ceremony, it arrived the very next morning. According to multiple witnesses, Dennis Hopper was not sober on his wedding day. When he woke the next morning, he reportedly didn't even recognize the woman lying beside him. What followed was a descent into terror. Obsessed with guns, Hopper once fired shots inside the house, leaving Michelle and her young daughter paralyzed with fear. On another occasion, lost in a drug-fueled delirium, he handcuffed and restrained Michelle, accusing her of being a witch. That was the moment Michelle understood the truth. If she didn't escape, she would be destroyed. The final push came from her father, who dragged her straight to a lawyer's office and said without hesitation, "Men like that never change. File for divorce now." Michelle listened. Her marriage to Dennis Hopper ended as abruptly as it began, after just 8 days. Having survived marriages to both John Phillips and Dennis Hopper, Michelle vowed never again to let her life revolve around men like them. She resurfaced as a glamorous Hollywood it girl, confidently moving through elite parties, briefly rekindling her romance with Jack Nicholson before leaving him for the infamous ladies' man Warren Beatty. For a time, it seemed Michelle had reclaimed her sparkle, her life once again glowing beneath flashing cameras and whispered admiration. But a quiet shadow was already forming. Michelle remained close to Cass Elliot, her longtime friend and former bandmate who had once conquered the world with her in the Mamas and the Papas. They shared everything, often letting their daughters play together. Michelle's daughter, China, was just 1 year younger than Cass's daughter, Owen. Yet there was one truth Cass had never revealed, the identity of Owen's biological father. In the summer of 1974, while the two women lay sunbathing beside a pool, Michelle finally found the courage to ask. Cass only smiled mysteriously and said, "I'll tell you when I get back from my London show." She never had the chance. Exhausted but determined, Cass still took the stage in London and shone as she always had. After the performance, she called Michelle, overwhelmed with joy at how well the show had gone. It was the last conversation they would ever share. The following night, Cass Elliot, only 32 years old, died suddenly. Despite years of rumors, the autopsy confirmed a heart attack, with no drugs found in her system. Cass left this world carrying her greatest secret with her, and Michelle was left behind with an irreplaceable absence that would haunt her forever.